Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 2026 Thomas Paine birthday celebration. My name is Margaret Downey. I'm the president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, which is one of 11 co-sponsors for tonight's event. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association is dedicated to educating the public about the life and work of Thomas Paine. We seek to build a memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor his legacy. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association is hopeful that tonight's program will inspire you to donate to the cost of such a memorial. All donations are tax deductible. Contact and donation information for the Thomas Paine Memorial Association will appear in the chat and within the closing slideshow. Tonight's presentation is entitled The Times That Tried Men's Souls, Thomas Paine's Service During the Revolutionary War. With the assistance of special guests, we will be highlighting Thomas Paine's military service, and little-known facts will be disclosed. Now, before I introduce my co-host, I want to acknowledge the attendance of a large group in Pikes Peak, Colorado. They are watching tonight's event in a community room located in a public library. And thanks so much for attending and organizing a group viewing. I'm co-hosting tonight with Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member, Dr. Christopher Cameron. Similar to me, Christopher is not a veteran, but also, like me, Christopher has family members who served the country that Thomas Paine helped to create. My father was in the Navy, and my son served in the Air Force.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be co-hosting this great event about Thomas Paine's military service. I was born on an army base in Heidelberg, Germany, where my parents met. My mother and father are Army veterans, and I have the highest regard for those who have given so much to maintain the secular and democratic government envisioned by Thomas Paine and other founders. We open the program with a short slideshow of today's agenda with the names of our speakers and an estimated timetable. We'll try to stay on track throughout the evening, and you may have noticed that there's a time slot for a short break around the middle of the program. This evening, we'll be working with Haider Shah, David Kondo, and Nena Ankwe as Zoom technicians. You'll meet all of them later during this program.
Now, before we get started, please note that all participants except for the presenters are muted. This will ensure the best quality for audio for everyone. Your questions can be typed into the chat feature at any time. If you would like for us to convey your question later in the program, just send your email address and question through the chat to the attention of Nena Ankwe, Christopher Cameron, or me. If we run out of time, our speakers have agreed to answer leftover questions through follow-up email correspondence. So please include your email address with your question or when you request to have a question read on your behalf.
I'm now very proud to introduce the co-chair of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, Congressman Jamie Raskin, who will be delivering a welcome statement. Congressman Raskin is an American attorney, law professor, and politician serving as a United States representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District since 2017. From 2007 to 2016, he served in the Maryland State Senate.
Hey you guys, it's Jamie Raskin from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. Although you're finding me in the Newark, New Jersey train station, I've been campaigning the last couple of days with friends up here and I'm on my way back home. But I want to say hello to all my friends at the Tom Paine Memorial Association. Thank you for observing the great man's birthday. Happy birthday, Tom Paine. Everywhere I go, you know, he has more relevance now than ever. And everybody's talking about Tom Paine and the urgency of recovering his message of government in the interests of the people and the necessity of everybody fighting in defense of democratic freedom. So I just want to thank you guys for keeping his memory burning bright and more alive now than ever. We need Tom Paine, and we need all of the strong, true blue, passionate Democrats to be standing up now. Don't be a sunshine patriot. Be a winter patriot, as well as a summer and a fall and spring patriot. So hang tough, everybody, and I will see you out in the fight for strong democracy in America and all over the world.
Thank you, Congressman Raskin. It's always a pleasure to have you open our program. We are also proud to host Congresswoman Victoria Spartz with her welcome message. She is the other co-chair of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. Congresswoman Spartz is a Ukrainian-born American politician and businesswoman. She is the United States representative for Indiana's 5th Congressional District.
This is Congresswoman Victoria Spartz from Indiana. It is my great honor to welcome you to celebrate 250th anniversaries of our great republic and also 250th anniversary of Common Sense by Thomas Paine. I hope Washington, D.C. does have a little bit more of common sense that will definitely serve the republic great. And I think it's very important to remind our future generations and current generations how much our previous generations went through and what a heroic people they were and what a tough situation they really in battles they fought. So I appreciate you being part of this anniversary. I appreciate you be part of this history and continue this message of freedom and strength for our republic and commemorate Thomas Paine's contributions to such, great cause. I mean, it cannot be underestimated. It also cannot be forgotten. So people like you are who participate in this event will carry this torch forward, and it is my honor to do it on a bipartisan basis that, there is not much bipartisanship happening in Congress, but I think we can do it in such important events. So I'm glad to be part of it and appreciate you being here and welcome to this event. And you always know that no matter how difficult things are going to be, when things come, they're important for this republic. We can come together and keep our republic strong. Hopefully after this election year, we'll have a little bit more of the bipartisanship and strength and some positive things that are going to be happen and more common sense in Washington, D.C. But I think what you're doing for Thomas Paine and for this republic is really appreciated by all of us and United States Congress. And I would thank on behalf of all my party and really the whole Congress. Thank you very much, and hopefully you'll enjoy the event.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Spartz. We appreciate your support of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association's work.
And now, a very special guest is going to honor us with a visit. It was Dr. Benjamin Franklin who encouraged Thomas Paine to travel to the colonies in 1774. Dr. Franklin recognized Thomas Paine as a brilliant writer and social activist who could help inspire colonists to fight for independence. Thomas Paine was 38 years old when he arrived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Within a few months, Dr. Franklin saw his protege achieve his vision and more. Welcome, Dr. Franklin.
Thank you, Margaret. Through the science of technology, I have come back to life to welcome you to the 2026 celebration of the birth of my friend and fellow revolutionist, Mr. Thomas Paine. It is with great pleasure and a sense of reverent duty that I welcome you to this birthdate event, an event that will also recognize the military service of Mr. Paine. Few men may claim to have held both the pen and musket in defense of liberty, but Mr. Paine did just so. when tyranny pressed upon our necks and doubt clouded the hearts of colonists, his words, clear, fierce, and aflame, cut through despair like a lantern in a storm. These are the times that try men's souls, he wrote, and try them they did. But his soul, I dare say, did not falter. He gave to this fledgling nation more than common sense. He gave courage to the weary soldier, hope to the battered camp, and purpose to the cause of liberty itself. And lest we forget, when the call to arms was not merely metaphor, Mr. Paine bore that burden too, serving not from afar, but in the very ranks where cold rations and colder nights tested all but the stoutest hearts. So tonight, we acknowledge Mr. Paine's birth, but also sincere gratitude for his sacrifice, his service, and his singular role in the birth of this republic. Let us remember that this revolution was not won by generals and diplomats alone, but also by pamphleteers with fire in their hearts, and patriots with the courage to act. May Mr. Paine's words continue to stir the slumbering spirit of freedom, and may his service ever remind us that liberty demands both voice and valor. Huzzah!
Benjamin Franklin was portrayed by actor Brian Patrick Mulligan. In addition to thousands of live corporate appearances, Brian's Benjamin Franklin has appeared on PBS, The Game Show Network, HBO Max, the Disney Channel, Comedy Central, The Food Network, CNN, Jimmy Kimmel Live, The Tonight Show, and Now for Us. Thank you, Brian. We now present our keynote speaker, the author of Tom Paine's War, Jack Kelly. I am reading his book and learning so much about Thomas Paine's military service. Jack is an award-winning author and historian. His books include Band of Giants, which received the Daughters of the American Revolution History Medal, and God Save Benedict Arnold, which was a finalist for the New England Book Award.
Jack has published 5 novels. He is a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellow in nonfiction literature. He has appeared on the History Channel, National Public Radio, and C-SPAN. It was a pleasure to meet him in person at the June 2025 Thomas Paine Day. That event was held in New Rochelle, New York. New Rochelle is not far from Jack's home, located in the New York Hudson Valley area. Welcome, Jack, and thank you for being our keynote speaker.
Thank you. I want to thank Margaret Downey and all the folks who helped to organize this event, and thank all of you for tuning in. I chose to write about Thomas Paine for the 250th anniversary of our country's birth because I wanted to get at both sides of the revolution. On the one hand, the ideas and values that were so world-shaking at that time, and on the other hand, the great struggle and sacrifice that was required to make those ideas a reality. And Thomas Paine was involved in both aspects of the revolution. He articulated the ideas of equality and natural rights more clearly, more boldly than anyone. And he demonstrated his commitment to the cause by volunteering for the Pennsylvania militia at a time when the existence of the country was on the line. So who was Thomas Paine? I want to share an image of him with you. One thing to know about Thomas Paine is that he was an immigrant. He was born in England. His family was working class. His father was a corset maker. And his parents had to really scrimp just to give him an elementary school education. And after that, he basically educated himself for the rest of his life. But when he was 12 years old, he went to work for his father as an apprentice to learn the corset making trade, working 14-hour days. And when he came of age, he went out on his own as a corset maker. And he had several other jobs in England. He was a school teacher for a while. He kept a tobacco shop, and eventually he got a job as a tax collector. So basically, he was just scraping by on the lowest rung of the British middle class. He was not an intellectual. He was not a rich man, and he certainly did not own slaves. And one of the things he liked to do in England was to participate in tavern debates. And men would get together in the public house, and over pints of ale, they would discuss the issues of the day, and they would give a prize for whoever had the sharpest arguments. And Paine often won that prize because he was quick-witted. He knew how to skewer his opponents. And in particular, he had a very clear way of presenting his arguments so that they could be understood by anybody. And that was a skill that came in very handy for him later in his life. And he liked to drink. Thomas Paine loved the ideas of the Enlightenment. He agreed with the notion of natural rights that were rights that came to you as a human being and were not bestowed by a government or authority. He loved science. He took courses in astronomy, and he eventually became friendly with Benjamin Franklin. And of course, Franklin, who was also from a working class background, was one of the great scientists of the day and had been living in London for quite a number of years at that point. In 1774, when Thomas Paine was 37 years old, he found himself at loose ends. He had been fired from his job. He separated from his wife. So he decided to try his luck in America. And he got a recommendation from Benjamin Franklin. He came across the ocean, settled in Philadelphia, and he found a job as a magazine editor, another new profession for him. And he loved Philadelphia. He loved the coffee houses and the taverns and the real ferment of ideas that were going through the colonies at that time. And he landed there very late in 1774, and less than 6 months later, the Revolutionary War broke out with the violence at Lexington and Concord. And Thomas Paine later wrote, when the country into which I had set my foot was set on fire about my ears, it was time to stir. It was time for every man to stir. And he embraced the patriot cause with a great passion. And some of his friends, knowing that he had this facility for writing, suggested that he write a pamphlet that would describe the conflict between Britain and the colonies from an Englishman's point of view. And he thought this was a good idea. These pamphlets have been compared to social media posts of our time. They were cheap. They were meant to be copied and spread around and talked about. One of Thomas Paine's friends, Benjamin Rush, who was a doctor and politician in Philadelphia, encouraged him to write the pamphlet, but he said, don't go too far. Don't mention the word independence. And the reason was that even though the war was sputtering along in the fall of 1775, most Americans were not for independence or a complete break with Britain. What they were aiming at was reconciliation with the British Crown under better terms. They basically wanted to make a deal. And Thomas Paine completely ignored the advice he got from Rush and wrote a very strong argument for independence. And the remarkable thing about this pamphlet that he produced, in addition to the content, which was quite extraordinary, was the style. There were many pamphlets being published at the time, and almost all of them were written by intellectuals for other intellectuals. They used a very high style language. They had a lot of quotes from the classics. And Thomas Paine wrote in a very down-to-earth style, a style that could be understood by a farmer or a laborer. And basically, he was writing in common language for common people, and he called the pamphlet Common Sense. And he began with some simple arguments for independence. For example, he said that Britain uh, pretended to be protecting the colonies when in fact they were drawing the colonies into their wars with their European enemies. And he said it didn't make any sense that an island would forever rule over an entire continent. And he said, with the war on, there really was no going back. He said, the blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'tis time to part. And then he went further. And what he had to say next made this really one of the consequential documents in world history, because he said, in effect, the king is a fraud. The king has no divine right to rule you. All kings rule through force of arms and not from some right that they have. Hereditary aristocracy is an insult. The division of people into subjects and kings is an absurdity. And he said, the king is a worm who, in the midst of his splendor, is crumbling into dust. And this was language that Americans had never heard before, and their jaws dropped open. And then he went further still. And he said, this uprising is not just about uh, gaining independence from the British king. He said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And he thought that Americans could change the system of monarchies that had existed for centuries around the world and substitute a new form of government, a government of and by the people. And this was the great cause that Thomas Paine envisioned for the American Revolution. And it made sense, because if you're going to ask patriots to risk their lives, it had to be for something big, to begin the world over again. And if these pamphlets were like social media posts, Common Sense was really the first viral post. It was phenomenally successful. Tens of thousands of copies were produced. It was passed around. It was reprinted in newspapers. It was talked about. It was read aloud. And it began to sway American public opinion toward independence. A man from Connecticut wrote to Thomas Paine at the time, and he said, you have declared the sentiments of millions. We were blind, but on reading your enlightening words, the scales dropped from our eyes. And what they saw was that this was about more than taxation or the price of tea. Thomas Paine had turned a rebellion into a true revolution. And he concluded Common Sense by saying that nothing would settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration of independence. He wrote those words in January of 1776. 6 months later, on 4th of July, the Continental Congress declared that the colonies were absolved from all allegiance to the British crown, and the world changed. Of course, the king didn't want the world to change, and he sent the largest expeditionary army in British history across the ocean to punish any man who would not bend the knee to his authority. 10,000 armed men to Canada, um, nearly 40,000 to New York City, and the nature of the Revolutionary War changed and became much more serious. Thomas Paine wanted to do what he thought that a citizen of a republic should do. He gave over all the profits from Common Sense to buy supplies for the army. He didn't think he should profit from the cause. And then he signed up with the Pennsylvania militia to march off to war. And that brings us to the theme of today's program, which is the really extraordinary fact that even though Thomas Paine was now a celebrity author, he was known throughout the colonies, he was willing to join the militia and march as a private. And the unit that he signed up with uh, was called the Associators. And it was from an idea that Benjamin Franklin had years earlier of how to get the Quakers of Pennsylvania involved in the militia. And he came up with an idea of a militia unit that was completely voluntary. It was democratic. They elected their own officers, and it had relatively short enlistment periods. And the men who joined the Associators were very much like Thomas Paine himself. They were working people, what they called leather apron men. Might be a blacksmith or a shoemaker or a teamster. And so Paine got along very well with those men as he marched along with them. They went out to Perth Amboy, New Jersey, um, and from across a narrow body of water, they could watch the great buildup of the British on Staten Island. And ships of the Royal Navy kept coming all during the summer of 1776, unloading redcoats, unloading Hessian mercenaries, supplies, cannon, ammunition. In August of 1776 began the great drumbeat of disaster for the Patriots. First came the Battle of Brooklyn, which would turn out to be the largest single battle of the entire war, a complete defeat for the Patriots. In September, the British took New York City, another defeat for the Patriots. In October, they were fighting up in White Plains, another defeat for the Patriots. In November, the British took Fort Washington. That was the last toehold that the Patriots had on the island of Manhattan. And it was another defeat for the Patriots. And it was really the worst defeat of all because the British captured almost 3,000 men out of an army that had originally only been 20,000. Thomas Paine was now with the Continental Army in Fort Lee, and he was an aide to General Nathaniel Greene, who was one of Washington's top generals. And he was able to watch from across the Hudson River the fall of Fort Washington. A few days later, Fort Lee fell to the British, and Thomas Paine and the other um, soldiers at Fort Lee had to scramble to avoid being captured. They left behind a large cache of supplies, and the British officer who marched into Fort Lee said the rebels ran like scared rabbits. And he said they left behind some of that scoundrel common sense man's letters, which we can read at our leisure. So even among the British, Thomas Paine had acquired this nickname of common sense. And then began the great retreat across New Jersey um, in December of 1776. It poured rain. The roads turned to mud. The quite a number of the men were marching barefoot. They had very little shelter because they'd lost most of their tents. And every day, the army shrank from illness, from enlistments running out, and from men just giving up and going home and deserting. They got all the way down to Trenton, New Jersey. Washington didn't think he could make a stand there. He crossed the Delaware River into Pennsylvania, and his at that point his 20,000 man army had shrunk down to 3,000 men. And he wrote to his brother at that time and he said, I think the game is pretty near up. And that was really the low point of the campaign, the low point of the year, and you might say the low point of American history. And the British thought that they had won. They had defeated the Patriots um, at every turn. They had um, pushed them all the way back out of two colonies. And so General Howe, their commander, decided to go into winter quarters, and he stationed Hessian regiments in the various towns around New Jersey to hold that territory. And then he and his top officers went back to New York City to enjoy themselves. And then a miracle happened. Um, and Thomas Paine played a significant role in that miracle. All during the retreat, he'd been talking to the troops that he knew. I mean, he'd marched as an enlisted man. He knew the enlisted men, and he'd associated with the officers at headquarters, so he knew the officers. And so he had a real perspective on the Army, and he saw that they needed a boost of morale. And he'd been taking notes all during the campaign, and now he pulled it all together into a new pamphlet, and he published that on December 19th in 1776, and he called it the American Crisis. And it began with what are probably his most famous words: "These are the times that try men's souls." And he went on to assure the patriots that they could prevail, and to shame the loyalists who were still cooperating with Britain, to tamp down fear among the patriots, and to channel the anger that the soldiers felt because they knew that British and Hessian soldiers were raping American women and girls. They knew that patriot homes were being invaded and looted and destroyed. And Paine said it's going to be difficult, but he said that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. And his words mattered. The morale in the Army did begin to rise. More militiamen did begin to turn out. And The American Crisis was another bestseller. It was read, it was passed around, it circulated through the Army. And probably the really most important audience for The American Crisis was George Washington himself, because he was in the process of making a momentous decision and a very risky decision. We don't know what factors he considered, but 6 days after the publication of The American Crisis, George Washington decided to take all of his men back across the Delaware River, back into New Jersey, and in the middle of the night, in a raging snowstorm, they marched the 10 miles down to Trenton through bitter cold, many of the men still barefoot, some of them dressed in rags, clutching a musket. They arrived at Trenton just after dawn. They fought a professional mercenary army, and they won. They could hardly believe it themselves. After all those defeats, finally, they won. And they took 900 Hessians prisoner. And that crossing of the Delaware, of course, is one of the iconic images of the entire revolution. But what happened next was also important. They took the prisoners back to Pennsylvania, and George Washington wanted more. He did not want to end the campaign on yet another retreat. And so he made the really gutsy decision to go back across the Delaware, back into New Jersey. And this time it would be an even riskier proposition, because now he would be fighting both the British and the Hessian armies. Now he would have the Delaware River at his back, so there'd be no more retreating. And now he knew that 90% of his men in his army had their enlistments run out on January 1st. And they were crossing on December 30th and December 31st. So George Washington had to beg his men to to stay with the Army, to re-enlist for a little while longer. And he said to them, "My brave fellows, you have done all that I asked and more, but we know not how to spare you." And not all of them did re-enlist, but many did, and enough did. And with the words of Thomas Paine ringing in their ears, the Americans crossed to Trenton. They lined up along the Assunpink Creek, which runs on the south side of the village of Trenton into the Delaware River. The British lined up on the other side. The Americans were dug in on the south side, and there was one bridge that crossed that creek, and it was getting dark. And the second battle of Trenton climaxed when the British decided to cross that bridge, break the American line, break the American spirit, and finally, once and for all, to put down this rebellion. They surged across. They almost made it to the other side. But then the firepower and the willpower of the Americans turned them back. They regrouped. They tried again. Again, they were stopped. They tried a third time, and again, they were stopped. And each time, a great shout went up from all the Americans. And the witness who reported that said they shouted as one man. But he was mystified as to how that could happen because the American line was more than a mile long and you couldn't see from one end to the other. So how could they all shout in unison? And another man said General Washington rode up and ordered the army to cheer. And as I write in Tom Paine's War, maybe that was it. Maybe that man who so often kept his own counsel, whose heart had been broken by the losses and defeats of the previous autumn, who had endured that long retreat across New Jersey, maybe that man, for one moment, needed to exult. Maybe he led the shout himself. And perhaps to some minds, maybe it was a shout to awaken history, to remind generations unborn of the dangers these men had faced and the hardships that they had endured. Maybe it was a cry, as Thomas Paine said, to the future world, that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and repulse it. The Patriots had fought the British to a standstill, and that night they slipped away, marched through the night, and in the morning fought the British rear guard at Princeton, defeated them, and then escaped to secure winter quarters around Morristown, New Jersey. And the entire tone and direction of the Revolutionary War changed. I want to talk briefly about the relevance of Thomas Paine to our own time. I think many would agree we're passing through a pretty fraught time in our history. And some have questioned how durable our democracy really is. Thomas Paine, in his day, was reviled. He had expressed a great enthusiasm for the French Revolution. He had written an Enlightenment critique of Christianity, and those factors really had made him an outcast. Ministers burned his books in New England because they said he was an infidel, and his works were banned many times, have been banned many times in the meantime. Um, so is he still relevant? Is he, as I say, the founder for our time? I think he is because he wrote for people who were expressing a um, who were facing a real crisis, and um, I think some of the points that he made for them, and I'll just mention 3 points from his writings, really apply to us. Um, the first was don't panic, and Paine said, panic is natural, you can expect it, but it really does no good to um, act out of desperation. He said, I fear not, I see no real cause for fear, and I love the man who can smile in trouble and gather strength from distress. So that's the first thing, is to stay calm and resolute. Secondly, I mentioned that these are the times that try men's souls uh, are the best known of Thomas Paine's words. But lately, I've been hearing a quotation from Common Sense, where he said, "In America, the law is king. For as in absolute governments, the king is law, so in free nations, the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other." So I think that's very important, that at the very beginning of our country, the rule of law was emphasized by Thomas Paine. And the third thing is, I mentioned that in the American crisis, Thomas Paine spoke about hope. And he was always an optimist. He was not naive, but he really felt that Americans could begin the world over again. And Nelson Mandela said, hope is a powerful weapon. And I think Thomas Paine would have agreed with that. And he would have said to those who deny that there's hope, look around you. There may be hope everywhere, in local governments, in voluntary associations, in neighbors helping neighbors, in activists standing up for traditional rights, and in just people joining together to do good. Every day, every year, every election brings a new beginning, and hope really is a powerful weapon. And Thomas Paine told a story in the American crisis that I think is relevant today. When they were retreating across New Jersey, he encountered a loyalist, and that man had his small child with him. And he looked at Thomas Paine and he said, "What I want is peace in my day." And Thomas Paine was appalled. And he wrote, "What a generous parent could have said was, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace." And I think that's something we always have to keep in mind. Democracy is always looking to the future. It's not just about us, it's about the next generation and the next, because they have rights and we have an obligation to protect their rights. So I think that if we turn away from fear, demand the rule of law, and keep a tight grip on hope, that perhaps, as Thomas Paine wrote, by perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack. I look forward to finishing your book. We at the Thomas Paine Memorial Association and scholars of early American history such as myself very much appreciate your vital work in shedding new light on the life, writings, and service of this critically important founding father. As Jack mentioned, Thomas Paine wrote the American Crisis Papers on and off the battlefield. He wrote 13 American Crisis Papers in all to honor the establishment of the 13 colonies, but Thomas Paine considered his American Crisis Papers a continuation of his original pamphlet, Common Sense.
The logo of this event is a photo of a memorial that depicts Thomas Paine writing the American Crisis Papers. Sculpted by George Lober, the memorial captures Thomas Paine in his role as a Revolutionary War soldier. In the next presentation, you will see the New Jersey Memorial from different angles as we present a reading of Thomas Paine's American Crisis I. Tonight, we are very pleased to present Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member Ian Ruskin reciting Thomas Paine's beautiful and inspirational words. During Ian's recitation, the Morristown Memorial pictures will help you imagine Thomas Paine putting his thoughts to paper using the top of a drum as a desk.
Ian is a professional actor who researched and wrote a one-man play entitled To Begin the World Over Again, The Life of Thomas Paine. He has performed it over 150 times in America, England, and France. Ian will continue his work in the 250th anniversary year of the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of the United States of America with live performances, a re-airing of the film version of the play on PBS, and many other activities. He is happy to be reading excerpts from Paine's American Crisis I, which was such an important document in rallying the troops and giving them hope that victory was possible. Another example of the power of Paine's words that changed the world.
I had formed my plan of life, and conceiving myself happy, wished everybody else so. But when the country into which I had just set my foot was set on fire about my ears, it was time to stir. It was time for every man to stir. Those who had been long settled had something to defend. Those who had just come had something to pursue, and the call and the concern was equal and universal. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. As I was with the troops at Fort Lee, and marched with them to the edge of Pennsylvania, I am well acquainted with many circumstances which those who live at a distance know but little or nothing of. Our situation there was exceedingly cramped, the place being a narrow neck of land between the North River and the Hackensack. Our force was inconsiderable, being not 1/4 so great as Howe could bring against us. We had no army at hand to have relieved the garrison had we shut ourselves up and stood on the defensive. Both officers and men, though greatly harassed and fatigued, frequently without rest, covering, or provision, the inevitable consequences of a long retreat, bore it with a manly and martial spirit. All their wishes were one, which was that the country would turn out and help them to drive the enemy back. I am as confident as I am that God governs the world, that America will never be happy till she gets clear of foreign dominion. Wars without ceasing will break out until that period arrives, and the continent must in the end be conqueror. For though the flame of liberty may sometimes cease to shine, the coal can never expire. Let them call me rebel and welcome, I feel no concern from it. But I should suffer the misery of devils were I to make a whore of my soul by swearing allegiance to one whose character is that of a sottish, stupid, stubborn, worthless, brutish man. I call not upon a few, but upon all, not on this state or that state, but on every state. Up and help us. Lay your shoulders to the wheel. Better have too much force than too little, when so great an object is at stake. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and to repulse it.
Thank you, Ian, for bringing Thomas Paine back to life in your excellent delivery of the words he penned. The Thomas Paine Memorial we highlighted in the slideshow is located in Burham Park. The exact park address is 200 South Street in Morristown, New Jersey. We will place the exact location information into the chat. Christopher and I will now read the inscriptions that are found on the memorial as you view close-up photos on your screen.
The scroll that Thomas Paine is writing upon has words from the American Crisis I. I'm not quite as eloquent as Ian, but it's my honor to convey Paine's magnificent words found on that scroll. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation. Then the scroll wording stops there.
Thank you, Christopher. On the back of the memorial, visitors will find the following words: presented to the people of Morristown, New Jersey, during the administrations of Mayors Clyde Potts and Edward K. Mills, Jr., by the Thomas Paine Memorial Committee. Joseph Lewis, Secretary. George Lober, Sculptor. Dedicated July 4th, 1950, in the 174th year of American independence. In the 1940s, the Thomas Paine Memorial Committee knew that Thomas Paine's legacy could best be described by quoting Revolutionary War notables. Notables who appreciated the contributions Thomas Paine had made on so many levels. Therefore, on the left side of the memorial, the sentiments of 5 people are highlighted, each conveying their opinion of Thomas Paine. Some are speaking directly to him, and others are offering an opinion that they hoped would resonate with those viewing the memorial. Washington's sword would have been wielded in vain had it not been supported by the pen of Paine. History is to ascribe the American Revolution to Thomas Paine. John Adams. The citizens of the United States cannot look back upon the time of their own revolution without recollecting among the names of their most distinguished patriots that of Thomas Paine. James Monroe. America is indebted to few characters more than you. General Nathanael Greene. Be assured, my dear friend, that instead of repenting that I was your introducer in America, I value myself on the share I had in procuring for it the acquisition of so useful and valuable a citizen. Benjamin Franklin. Free America without her Thomas Paine is unthinkable. Lafayette.
On the front of the memorial, the following can be found. His name appears, and the next line has Thomas Paine's life dates. They are 1737 to 1809. The inscription goes on to state, English by birth, French citizen by decree, American by adoption. Author of The American Crisis, Rights of Man, The Age of Reason. Your presence may remind Congress and the people of your past services to this country. George Washington. As you can see by the photo on your screen, the words inscribed on the right side of the memorial are quotations from Thomas Paine. I'll do my best to do them justice as a Paine enthusiast. Independence is my happiness, and I view things as they are without regard to place or person. My country is the world, and my religion is to do good. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. It is folly to argue against determined hardness. Eloquence may strike the ear, and the language of sorrow draw forth from the tear of compassion, but nothing can reach the heart that is steeled with prejudice. We fight not to enslave, but to set a country free, and to make room upon the earth for honest men to live in it. It is an affront to truth to treat falsehood with complacence. Thomas Paine.
Well done, Christopher. Thank you. We hope all of you enjoyed learning more about the Thomas Paine Memorial located in Morristown, New Jersey. We will be telling you more about the current plans for a Washington, D.C. Thomas Paine Memorial later in the program, and you will be meeting our selected sculptor, Zenos Frudakis, during the social hour. We are pleased to now present another program speaker. As the Thomas Paine Memorial Association was preparing to submit a Washington, D.C. memorial site request in 2021, we discovered a veterans group in Florida. They call themselves Florida Veterans for Common Sense. I immediately reached out to them, and later I was pleased to learn that there is also a national group named Veterans for Common Sense. Florida Veterans for Common Sense was founded in 2002. They are a 501c4 organization dedicated to advocacy on behalf of United States veterans who continue to serve their country by protecting the rights and interests of fellow citizens. Gene Jones is a founding member of Florida Veterans for Common Sense and the current president of the group. He also serves as the president of the Florida Veterans for Common Sense Fund. Gene's testimony during the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission site process meeting was instrumental in getting a unanimous approval from the commissioners. He presented so many reasons why there should be a memorial to Thomas Paine in Washington, D.C., and Gene tipped the scales in our favor.
Thank you for that 2022 National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission's testimony, Gene. Thanks also for your service in the United States Air Force as a linguist and analyst. Gene practiced law in Sarasota, Florida until his retirement in 1999. He wrote the books Adventuring in Paradise, a nonfiction outdoor recreation guide for Southwest Florida, and Suwannee Divide, a historical novel about Florida during the Civil War. The Sarasota Herald Tribune and other Florida media outlets have published Gene's guest columns. He is a frequent speaker about Florida during the Civil War, as well as a representative for local and national issues affecting veterans.
Gene will now tell us more about Florida Veterans for Common Sense and why Thomas Paine was chosen to represent their vision, mission, and goals. Welcome, Gene.
Thank you, Margaret, for your kind introduction. I'm very proud to speak to you as a representative of Florida Veterans for Common Sense. We admire Thomas Paine as a patriotic soldier who served in the Pennsylvania militia and also in the Continental Army. We also esteem his intellectual leadership as set forth in his historic pamphlets, Common Sense and the Crisis Papers. We named our group in recognition of his revolutionary ideas as set forth in these powerful works that birthed our nation. As a soldier, Paine endured the Continental Army's dismal retreat from New York as the troops tramped through the winter cold, snow, and mud without proper shelter or clothing, some without shoes. Complicating the misery, the British Army nipped at its heels. As veterans, we understand the sacrifice and fortitude necessary to endure as winter soldiers. Florida Veterans for Common Sense esteems Paine for more than being a soldier of the Revolution. For us, he is also a model of civic sacrifice and duty. Thomas Paine understood that service to country does not end when the fighting stops. Paine showed us that courage and sacrifice must continue with an unwavering commitment to the common good and for the happiness of future generations. Paine exemplified patriotism. He contributed the money earned from common sense to provide mittens for soldiers. He took no royalties from the crisis paper and required the printer to price it as low as possible to keep it affordable. He did not copyright the work, so it would receive the widest syndication. His sacrifice and dedication were critical to the birth of the United States. We follow Paine's example with good works. We lend a hand to downtrodden veterans with necessities such as housing, transportation, and groceries. We helped initiate a veterans court to assist veterans in trouble with the law. We plant microforests to combat climate change and to make our communities more pleasant and resilient. As George Washington said, Americans owe their liberty to Thomas Paine more than any other man. In Paine's legacy, we strive to keep liberty alive and advance the promise of America. Each year, we present a Thomas Paine Award to a patriot who stands tall for democracy. Example of prior award winners are Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman and Representative Jamie Raskin. This year's winner, Professor Ruth Ben-Giat, will be recognized at our annual Thomas Paine Party in February 2026. She sets out in her books, talks, and Substack that she names Lucid, How to Recognize and Defeat Authoritarianism. Speaking out now is critically important because, as in 1776, we again face an authoritarian threat. As Paine said, those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must undergo the fatigue of supporting it. We agree with Paine in that regard. So rest assured, Florida Veterans for Common Sense will continue to do our part to advance the promise of America, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Florida Veterans for Common Sense would like to thank you for this opportunity to participate in this program.
Thank you, Jean. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you. I've previously mentioned the Thomas Paine's connection to New Rochelle, New York, during this program, but its importance is yet to be highlighted sufficiently. In 1784, the New York legislature granted Thomas Paine a 277-acre property in New Rochelle. The state gave him the land as a reward for his financial contributions, his battlefield service during the Revolutionary War, and his literary contributions. His words spurred the troops to continue the fight for liberty. On the New Rochelle property sat a small cottage. Thomas Paine lived in the cottage from 1802 to 1806. We now present a video about the cottage produced by Gary Bush and Suzanne Tanswell. They are the trustees of the Huguenot New Rochelle Historical Association, the current nonprofit organization which owns and operates the Thomas Paine Cottage.
Welcome to the Thomas Paine Cottage Museum, where we are honored to educate on the writings and life of one of our most influential, sometimes misunderstood and underappreciated founding fathers, Thomas Paine. As we approach the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we ponder, if not for Thomas Paine's writings, would the signing have even taken place? Would the Continental Army have continued the fight for freedom? We think not. At this celebration of Paine's birthday, we offer the history of Paine's New Rochelle homestead. New Rochelle 1907, a period of great change. New large family homes were taking the place of farmland and old historic structures. This boom in new construction put structures like Paine's cottage in danger of demolition. Thankfully, Henry Lester, president of the Huguenot Association of New Rochelle, understood the historical significance of the cottage, purchased it from a Mr. Charles C., and financed the relocation to Sicard Avenue. With the help of our community, our association raised the funds to restore the badly damaged cottage, and on July 14, 1910, opened it as an historic home museum. It has been open to the public since then. We now take you back to June 1784, when this piece of farmland became part of Paine's larger homestead. February 16, 1784. Paine writes a letter to his friend General Lewis Morris.
As I have yet my place of citizenship to fix, I had much rather it were in the state of New York than Pennsylvania, and if it can be ordered so, I should like to have a residence amongst you, in preference to any place I have yet been in America.
June, 1784. Paine is awarded by New York State approximately 300 acres of New Rochelle farmland, confiscated from Tory sympathizer, Frederick DeVoe. Paine is now a New York landowner. The farm had a handsome house on it, and Paine received a distinguished welcome. An old lady remembers a man she knew only as Common Sense. When Paine took possession of his farm, he threw a village fete on the occasion. While in attendance, she recalls,
on that day he had something to say to everybody. He sat in the shade, and assisted in the labor of the feast, by cutting or breaking sugar to be used in some agreeable liquids by his guests. Mr. Paine was then, if not handsome, a fine agreeable-looking man.
1787. Thomas Paine travels to England, there he writes Rights of Man. It almost lands him in an English prison. He escapes to France where his time is dramatic. He is elected to the National Convention, supports the French Revolution, opposes the king's execution which leads to his own imprisonment. There he writes Part 1 of The Age of Reason. He is eventually released and on invitation of President Jefferson returns to America in 1802. The author of Common Sense, the pamphlet that sparked the American Revolution and American Crisis, that inspired the patriots to keep the fight for freedom, did not receive the welcome you would expect. His criticism of George Washington and his work, Age of Reason, made him wildly unpopular. A warm greeting back into the New Rochelle community was not waiting for him. Paris, April 20, 1793, Paine writes to Thomas Jefferson.
I just now received a letter from General Lewis Morris who tells me that the house and barn on my farm at N. Rochelle are burnt down. I assure you I shall not bring money enough to build another.
The manor house and a barn were gone. All that remained to inhabit was a small cottage. His neighbors whispered Madame Bonneville, a close friend who returned to America with Paine, her sons in tow, was supposedly his mistress. Christmas Eve 1805, a shot is fired near the window of Paine's cottage, narrowly missing Paine. In a letter to an esteemed friend, he describes this incident.
What you heard of a gun being fired into the room is true. Robert and Rachel were both gone out to keep Christmas Eve, and about 8 o'clock at night, the gun was fired. I run immediately out, one of Mr. Dean's boys with me, but the person that had done it was gone. I directly suspected who it was, and hallooed him by name, that he was discovered. I did this that the party might know I was on the watch. I cannot find any ball, but whatever the gun was charged with passed through about 3 or 4 inches below the window, making a hole large enough for a finger to go through. The muzzle must have been very near, as the place is black with powder, and the glass of the window is shattered to pieces.
1906, Paine goes to vote. Elisha Ward, a New Rochelle election inspector, denied him on grounds he was not an American citizen. The elector claimed Paine forfeited his citizenship by taking a seat in the French National Convention. Despite Paine's appeals to Jefferson, Madison, and Vice President Clinton, he was ultimately kept from voting. Paine leaves New Rochelle, moves to Greenwich Village, where he dies on June 8, 1809. After being denied burial in a Quaker cemetery, in accordance with his will, he is buried on his farm on June 10. 6 people attended. Thomas Emmet, Madame Bonneville and her son were 3 of the 6. 10 years later, in the dead of night, William Cobbett is behind desecrating Paine's grave. He sails to England with Paine's stolen body. Funds were never secured for a proper gravesite. Folklore has Paine's bones scattered to all 4 corners of the world. So ended Paine's physical connection to New Rochelle, temporarily. New Rochelle may not have been kind to Paine on his return, but New Rochellians have always been able to correct the wrongs of her past. 1839, the first monument erected to a founding father was dedicated to Paine. Today standing at the top of Paine and North Avenue. Moved from its original location near Paine's gravesite. Paine biographer, Moncur Daniel Conway, secures a piece of Paine's brainstem, and on October 15, 1905 it is buried within the monument. Paine again is laid to rest next to his New Rochelle homestead. 1908, the cottage is saved. Securing its future as a historic home museum. Opening on July 14, 1910. 1925, Thomas Paine National Historical Association builds their headquarters near Paine's cottage and monument. And opens the Thomas Paine Memorial Building. 1952, a plaque is placed on North Avenue, by our association and benefactor, Mrs. Stillman. Indicating the approximate location of Paine's original gravesite. 2008, funds are raised to restore the cottage's exterior to its original facade. 2011, the Institute for Thomas Paine Studies at Iona University, is established. Giving students unique opportunities to delve into the rich history of Thomas Paine and his works. June 2022. The Thomas Paine New Rochelle Center is formed. Its purpose, to promote the historical importance of Thomas Paine by providing programming, event space, and a platform to educate the world about Thomas Paine. April 16, 2024. New Rochelle City Council establishes June 8 as a permanent annual Thomas Paine Day. October 2025. Installation of signage at the Thomas Paine Monument. Work of preserving Paine's legacy continues. Further establishing New Rochelle as the hub of education and preservation of Paine's writings and teachings. Here at the cottage we tell of Paine's early life, as a patriot, and as a New Rochelle resident. Although his return to New Rochelle was not entirely pleasant, there were moments of joy, when Madame Bonneville's son stayed for summer visits. And times of accomplishment. In 1805, Paine's last pamphlet was written. Titled, Constitutional Reform, it was addressed to the citizens of Philadelphia to advocate for changes in government. His friendships forged with Mrs. Bayeux, on his frequent visits to her nearby tavern. And who spent her final years protecting Paine's empty grave and tombstone from relic hunters. Frequently opening her window to scare them away. And Thomas Addis Emmet, an Irish patriot and prominent New York lawyer. Their friendship formed as both were regarded as radical immigrants who sought to influence American society according to their democratic ideals. Serving as executor of Paine's estate and stood to honor his friend at his burial service. Our rooms depict Paine's simple life in New Rochelle and his long and enduring friendship with Madame Bonneville and her family. An original Franklin stove, given to Paine, lost to the cottage until restoration work in the early 20th century, is displayed. And a few original pieces from Paine's time in New Rochelle and America. Paine enthusiasts the world over come to see the cottage Paine called home. We create educational historical events for all ages and continue our preservation work. Private nonprofits exist on the generosity of members, supporters, visitors, and donors that we are grateful for. For over 100 years, we have been proud and privileged to be the owners and administrators of the cottage, and we will continue to be its steward. We welcome all visitors, young and old, to Paine's New Rochelle homestead.
We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation, similar to the present, hath not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand, and a race of men, perhaps as numerous as all Europe contains, are to receive their portion of freedom. From the events of a few months.
Thank you for submitting this wonderful overview and history of the Thomas Paine New Rochelle Center, Gary and Suzanne. The center sounds like a wonderful place to visit, and I would love to attend a June Thomas Paine Day there soon.
Christopher, I noticed that we have approximately 300 participants in this Zoom connection. I say approximately because the attendee number changes as people Zoom in and out according to their schedules. But if every person I currently see attending this event would donate just $17.76 to the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, we would have a grand total of $5,528.
Well, that would certainly help with our efforts. Imagine if a few people donated $1,776. We are placing a donation link in the chat. Before we start the question and answer segment of the event, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. During the break, we'll host a wonderful presentation from the musical The Crossing. The Crossing musical places Thomas Paine and his American crisis front and center as it sheds a fresh light on Washington's famous crossing of the Delaware River. Jason Huza wrote the book and lyrics, and John Allen Watts wrote the music for The Crossing.
The song selection we will feature during this break is titled, "These Are the Days." An actor opens the song portraying Thomas Paine. He is joined by 5 actors portraying little-known patriots. Among them is Jacob Francis, a free Black man who enlisted in the Continental Army just in time to be a part of the famous December 1776 crossing of the Delaware River. During the song presentation, if you need to leave your room, please turn the volume of your device up high so you can hear the beautiful voices from afar. And if you miss this 5-minute performance during the break, don't worry. It will be on the recording of this event, which will be posted on various YouTube channels by most of the event sponsors.
Is this a folly to charge the poor for war's expense? I didn't think so when I wrote down common sense. But all these soldiers, well, they sold a bill of goods. Frozen, shoeless, desperate, abandoned in these woods. I heard
we were freemen, not even believing such news the winds could bring. The word from on high, like a sign in the sky, shook the world from the lowest to the king.
I marched out of Princeton, convinced in the wisdom of man who we'll never know. Thrown every problem from Kips Bay to Harlem, and now we've no place to go.
'Cause suddenly doubt is a factor our leaders we can't quite absolve. And so we awaken with deep desperation as fate tests our tepid resolve. These are the days, these are the moments, these are the times that will try a man's soul.
These are the stakes,
these are the torments, hope and despair vie for who gets control. These are the means, we are the people who haven't forgotten why our fathers came. One congregation, a righteous upheaval, will be remembered but not by our name.
The sunshine soldier, the storybook Tory, men without the vim to win. Followed my father, all 5 of my brothers, anything less would be a sin.
Freedom and franchise, now what would that feel like for people long overdue? If they win their freedom, then maybe they'll see that all men long for it too.
They'll find us now deep in the winter, foes both without and within. It somehow seems clear what is happening here will allow a new world to begin.
These are the days, these are the moments, these are the times that will try a man's soul. These are the stakes, these are the torments, hope and despair vie for who gets control.
These are the means, we are the people who haven't forgotten why our mothers came. One congregation,
a righteous upheaval, will be remembered but not by our name.
Our cause is just, and in that fact I trust. It's self-evident, Jefferson said. Though we are right and won't shy from a fight, is it pride to be right and be dead?
These ongoing wars and the settling of scores, a tradition firmly affixed.
Though often told stories of England's past glories, I'm glad for the ocean betwixt.
Then suddenly they're on our doorstep, England blood red for their part. And I'd love nothing more than to give 'em what for, if our leaders would lead us with heart.
These are the days, these are the moments, these are the times that will try a man's soul. These are the stakes, these are the torments, hope and despair vie for who gets control. These are the means, we are the people who haven't forgotten why our fathers came. One congregation, a righteous upheaval, will be remembered. Will be remembered. Will be remembered. Will be remembered, but not by our name.
We thank the following talented singers for their excellent portrayals of early American patriots: Jim Shubin, Aidan Briggs, Jonathan Mousset, and Tess Premack. Gavin Esham was Thomas Paine. We are so pleased that John Allen Watts is with us to provide an update on the production of the musical The Crossing. Audience members can keep up with the progress of The Crossing through a link which we will place in the chat. And now a few words from composer John Allen Watts.
Good evening, everyone. Margaret, thank you for bringing us together tonight. It's an honor to stand among so many patriots gathered to celebrate Thomas Paine, one of America's fiercest champions of liberty. Your presence here proves that Paine's spirit, bold, uncompromising, and rooted in truth, is alive and well today. 250 years ago, in the winter of 1776, America stood on the brink of collapse. Washington's army was in retreat after a string of defeats in New York. Hope was fading fast. Then, during that desperate retreat to the banks of the Delaware River, Thomas Paine wrote The American Crisis, a document that rallied Washington's army with words that rang out, "These are the times that try men's souls." That powerful call to courage inspired farmers, printers, and militia to cross an icy river on Christmas night and fight for a cause greater than themselves. That crossing saved the revolution, and it changed history. That's why my collaborator Jason Husa and I created The Crossing, a revolutionary new musical. This is not just Washington's story. It's the story of the ordinary people Thomas Paine believed in, the ordinary citizens who risked everything for freedom. We're bringing this production to the Patriots Theater in Trenton, New Jersey, just yards from where the battle took place. The premiere is set for December 2026, the 250th anniversary of that legendary night. We hope the musical and the Thomas Paine Memorial unveiling will happen together, creating a momentous celebration of his life and legacy. The Crossing is more than entertainment. It's a call to remember the resilience, unity, and courage that built this nation. If you'd like to help bring this vision to life, visit thecrossingmusical.com to learn how you can support the cause and honor the legacy of Thomas Paine and the patriots who crossed into history. Together we will create a production that inspires, uplifts, and endures. Thank you for your passion, your patriotism, and for keeping the flame of liberty burning bright. I invite you to cross with us.
Thank you, John. I've heard many of the songs in your musical, and I love them all. Before we segue into the question and answer portion of the program, Joy Massoff, a Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member, sent us a recorded message. Joy is currently completing her PhD. Consequently, she could not be with us tonight to participate in the upcoming question and answer portion of the program. We wanted people, however, to hear a very small excerpt from her dissertation, which is entitled Thomas Paine and the Company He Kept, Family and Friendship in the Time That Tried Men's Souls.
I'm so sorry that I couldn't be with you today, but thank you so much for including me in tonight's event. During my PhD research, I uncovered some very interesting facts about Thomas Paine's wartime experiences. As the Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention gathered to hammer out a state constitution, Paine decided that actions might speak louder than words, so he joined the Associators, a Pennsylvania flying camp. These local volunteer militias formed a collective civilian reserve in the event of an attack by the British. Paine's notion was to serve as a field correspondent for the Philadelphia Press and to report back from the battlefields, which was a startling new idea at the time. He began by volunteering as a secretary to General Daniel Roberdeau, a well-to-do Philadelphia merchant. By the fall of 1776, after the Associators were disbanded, he was made an aide-de-camp to General Nathaniel Greene, where Paine, now nearly 40 years old, found himself in the midst of loss on the fields of battle. Paine made an ungainly soldier, but he found companionship of a ribald kind with the troops. He was with Greene atop the New Jersey Palisades at Fort Lee, and together they watched the fall of Fort Washington on the New York side of the Hudson River. Paine stood alongside Greene when Washington soon issued orders to abandon the Jersey side fort. The hasty retreat left one British soldier to note. They have left some poor pork, a few greasy proclamations, and some of that scoundrel Common Sense man's letters. That night brought a cold, driving rain as Paine joined the march, two abreast, ragged. some without shoe to their feet, and most of them wrapped in blankets. Thus began the long walk back to Philadelphia. In spite of the discomforts and hardships, Paine's reports from the field were crisp, detailed, and designed to create a sense of immediacy. And he somehow managed to sound vaguely optimistic in spite of the dire conditions. But the reality was this: the Americans were in trouble. Foul weather and encroaching British troops sent the sodden American soldiers on a circuitous route to avoid ambushes. They endured British cannon fire from time to time, but Paine's days aboard a privateer served him well. Paine recalled his long-ago fears at the sound of a cannonball whistling by, but he wrote that he could now sit calmly with little discomposure. Paine's buoyancy, perhaps unfounded, brightened the gloomy scenario playing out as the Continental Army struggled. In Crisis 2, his triumphant prose addressed to the British troops bordered on political propaganda, but nonetheless it steadied a nervous populace. Paine wrote, "We may be surprised by events we did not expect, and in that interval of recollection you may gain some temporary advantage." Such was the case a few weeks ago, but we soon ripen again into reason, collect our strength, and while you are preparing for a triumph, we come upon you with a defeat. Such it has been, and such it would be were you to try it 100 times over. On December 8th, the bedraggled troops, their numbers thinned by desertion, crossed the Delaware River, taking all the ferry boats on the eastern shore so that the British could not cross. Fearing an attack on Philadelphia, Paine broke away from the column and started a solo 35-mile walk in the frigid cold to warn the city's residents of the danger. Paine, who thrived in the company of others, found himself totally alone. He slept rough and ate what he could forage. Somehow he made it, only to find Philadelphia under British control and its residents seized by fear and falsehoods. Paine, for the first time, was overcome by helplessness, but he knew he had one lethal weapon to use: his pen. As Washington's troops sheltered at nearby Valley Forge between 1777 and 1778, during one of the cruelest winters ever, Paine once more set pen to paper to make sense of it all and began to write. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value. He was able to write these words because he was living them. He, too, had huddled through the bitter cold, anxious and hungry. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed writing it. In memory of Thomas Paine's bravery, please donate to the Washington, D.C. Memorial tonight, as it is a very expensive venture. And to paraphrase Thomas Paine, what we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly.
Thank you, Joy. We are now pleased to present the question and answer segment of the program. Answering questions tonight are all the speakers you heard earlier, including Jack Kelly, Jean Jones, John Watts, actor Ian Ruskin, Gary Burton, president of the Thomas Paine Historical Association, Gary Bush and Suzanne Tanswell from the Thomas Paine Cottage in New Rochelle, New York, and lastly, Francis Chu, a Thomas Paine Rights of Man expert and a Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member. All are available to answer your questions.
We will have a time limit, but be assured that if you have questions we did not answer, there'll be a follow-up answer sent to you after the program. And if that's the case, you can provide your email address in a private chat to me, and I'll make sure that you get that answer. Audience members will remain muted, so if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand physically or use the raise hand function of the Zoom participation option. If you prefer to have your question read instead of asking it yourself, please enter it into the chat to the attention of Nena Unque. Nena is the communication manager for the Secular Coalition of America, which is one of our sponsors for tonight's events. She has been working in the background of this program as a spotlighting and chat manager. She'll now read a question that has come to us through the chat.
Thanks, Christopher. Lovely to be here, as always. So we had a question come in a little bit earlier in the program from Byron Carrier. And Byron asks, Thomas Paine's third book, The Age of Reason, probably led to his dying lonely and broke. It is also a needed look at Christianity and the Bible, even today. Will someone please discuss this?
Well, I really get upset when people say that Thomas Paine died poor. He did not. He actually did a lot of work during his time that it enabled him to have property, and he left a lot of money to the Bonnevilles. In fact, paid that money paid for their education.
Oh, I think Ian's raising his hand. Ian, I'm just going to ask you to unmute. So if you see the button, there you go.
Just Paine, when he wrote Age of Reason, he said he wrote it to inspire mankind to a more exalted idea of God. He didn't write it to turn people away from God, but he was a deist, and he was a deist. And he did not like any kind of organized religion. So the book attacks the Bible, but the book was it was an attack on atheism, on the slaughter of priests, which was going on in France, against the idea of a state religion. He had an exalted idea of God, and he wanted other people to as well. But he did attack the Bible. So it was a double-edged sword.
Great. I guess we can move on to some other people that have their hands raised. And so if you have your hand raised and you would like to turn on your video, you can do so. So I'll just ask Peter Hall is the first hand I see. I'm just going to ask you to start your video if you'd like, or you can just ask a question.
Okay. The question I have is, where do you think Thomas Paine would be politically now in America? What would be his reaction to what's going on in America? Where would he be politically in a spectrum?
Well, I'd like to answer that. I really don't like to speculate on what Thomas Paine would say or do at the current life that we are living. I only encourage people to read his works and to decipher them according to how you interpret his beautiful writings about bravery and patriotism, democracy, and that's what I say to people. I don't like to speculate about what Thomas Paine would say.
And I would just add to that, Margaret, that Thomas Paine was a man of heart and a man of empathy with common people. And I think that tells you where he would stand today.
I suspect, too, that Thomas Paine would be ahead of us all, because he was a person and a writer that really believed in advancing the promise of America. I mean, he was against slavery, the first, I believe, on record to be against slavery, and he was for equal rights for women. And so where he would stand today, he would be trying to expand democracy. I'm pretty confident about that.
Great.
Can I add to this as well, too?
Of course. Go ahead, Frances.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to say that, it's always hard to guess, where they might be, because they always change their minds. Like, for instance, Charles Dickens was against slavery, but he was opposed to blacks, to free blacks voting, and the same with Walt Whitman. So with Thomas Paine, it's always, it's kind of difficult, but I do think that he might be, I'd say he'd be very aware of like issues like inequality. I mean, he's known for this really famous statement. When in countries that are called civilized, we see age going to the workhouse and youth to the gallows, something must be wrong in the system of government. It would seem by the exterior appearance of such countries that all was happiness. But there lies from the eye of common observation a massive wretchedness that has scarcely any other chance than to expire in poverty or infamy. Its entrance into life is marked with the presage of its fate. And until this is remedied, it is in vain to punish. And he did talk a lot about how the wealthy were not being sufficiently taxed, and how the poor were facing all these taxes on things like windows, leather, all of these things. So I think he was definitely aware of inequality at that time, and I think he would be aware of it today as well too.
Great. Thanks so much, Francis. And I know, Byron, we read your question earlier. I think you wanted to clarify a few points, so I'll just highlight you really quick so you can talk. And if you see, there's a button that is asking you to unmute as well.
Thank you. Got my mouth in cheese now.
Oh, sorry. Yep, got you the worst time.
I thought that my question was missed earlier about Thomas Paine dying lonely and broke. My understanding was that he had given his money to the revolution and then lost most of it and was, I thought, broke. I might be wrong. But I think the more important point was that his third book, The Age of Reason, takes down the Bible and Christianity in very clear and strong terms. It's the kind of book that would rise the ire of Christians today. And it's the kind of book that I think should be considered today in terms of the relationship between Christianity, the Bible, and our political situation. So I was hoping to have others comment perhaps on whether that might be the case. That's my take, is that he lost favor because of that third book. Thank you.
That is true. I actually love The Age of Reason for the reasons you highlighted, but also because it explains completely what deism is, why they use the term nature's God, because God can only be understood through nature and only understood through science interpreting nature's God. And if anyone is interested in learning more about deism, which I think if more Christians were deists, they would say, let's take care of our earth. It is the language of God. But if anyone is interested in learning more about deism, please look up the World Union of Deists. It's a wonderful organization with a lot of information. They love Thomas Paine. They donated $1,000 to the memorial. And I just adore everyone in that group.
Great. And I see another question from Judy. I'm going to ask you to unmute. And if you'd like, you can also start your video as well. Whenever you're ready, you can ask the question. Hi, Judy.
I'm in my studio. I also just want to say that I have the great pleasure of knowing Ian Ruskin ever since he came to the United States and watching his whole playwriting thing happen. But what I was curious about was what was it like for the regular everyday people who were living at the time in between the loyalists and the patriots and the, because they're living in little towns and all this fighting is going on. And I was just wondering if anybody knows anything about the everyday life.
It was pretty miserable. Anytime that armies are marching around, it's not a pretty sight. And, people were pillaged and people were raped and it wasn't totally the British. So it wasn't a pleasant time for anybody. There were probably a third of the people were loyalists. And as we saw from the video about New Rochelle, their properties were expropriated after the war.
Right.
And, a lot of them left the country. I mean, from South Carolina, a lot of the population went to the Bahamas.
Were there any
teach
areas
about this subject. I teach about this quite a bit, and one of the sources I really like to use, although she's of course not sort of a regular person or common person, but Abigail Adams and her letters to John Adams during the Revolutionary War gives us really good insight into what folks were experiencing. She talks a lot about just the constant like shelling and bombardment from artillery that she can hear in Braintree, Massachusetts, about farmers not being able to get their harvests in, right? So some of the just real world economic challenges that come along with having a war, right next to you. So I think that's a really great source for insight into this.
Were there any areas that were relatively peaceful?
It sort of waxed and waned, right? The South was relatively peaceful in 76 and 77, but then the Southern campaign would start in 78, and so things kind of shifted down there. So it really just kind of depended on what time period we're looking at during the war.
One other question, and then I will be quiet. So were the wealthy people of the time on one side or the other, or was it divided?
Yeah, it was pretty divided. There were I think the loyalties lined up not so much along wealth versus lack of wealth, but really connection to Great Britain, right? Like if you were had some sort of appointed office from the crown, if you were a minister of the Church of England, of course you were much more likely to be loyal to the crown. There were plenty of wealthier people who were on the Patriot side, though.
Thank you. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thanks so much. And I know, Monty, I saw your hand raised earlier, so I just wanted to see if you wanted to speak. And if you want, you can unmute and ask your question.
Thank you. I heard earlier, I may have missed it because there'd been doom scrolling going on in the background, but that they were going to list the addresses, the exact addresses of where Thomas Paine memorials are. And I just wanted to see if anybody wanted to include that into the chat so I can copy it.
We weren't prepared to do all the monument locations, so why don't I get back with you regarding that? We have his birthplace in Thetford and Paris and Lewes, England, Bordentown, New Jersey. Of course, I mentioned the Morristown, New Jersey. And there's a beautiful, at the center in New Rochelle, there's an obelisk and many other things you can look at there. But I'll compile a list if that would help you, Monty. And in fact, we've had many people submitting articles of when they went to these areas and what they thought about them. We have a board member, Daniel Brine. I think he's with us tonight, but he has written some beautiful pieces about his trips, admiring Thomas Paine and following the footsteps of Thomas Paine. I can get those to you as well.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Margaret. And I saw Judah. I'll just ask you to unmute, and if you'd like, you can also start your video if you feel comfortable doing so.
Hello. I guess I've got two directions here that have come up to ask about. One is towards Paine's life after he moved back to New Rochelle. Wasn't part of the reason he was struggling as an outcast was because of his siding with against the Federalists with Jefferson. and that the third book and other things that he wrote about Washington was just used as excuses to come after him because he was trying to really defend democracy instead of the Federalist Party autocracy. The other question is unrelated. Does anyone know if during the war years Paine ever had to pick up a gun and kill anybody? And so two very different quests. Thanks. I'm going to mute so that you guys can see without me being on the picture.
I think Gary Burton would answer that.
That's not known. He was in several skirmishes with the British while they were crossing New Jersey. So I would assume that he was part of the defense of the troops there. Most of his activities are, he spied for, after they crossed into Pennsylvania and after the Trenton battle, he would, from Valley Forge, he would spy behind enemy lines occasionally. But as far as fighting, shooting a gun, I don't think that was his main function.
If I could follow up on that, I think Barry is correct, but I would just emphasize that the role that Paine did play in the military was a very important one, because in those days, all orders had to be written and they had to be copied and distributed to the troops, and the commanders needed somebody who could take an order and turn it into a written document and then copy it and have it in clear prose, and that was Paine's specialty. So it was a very important role that he played as what was called an aide-de-camp or simply a secretary for the commander.
And that memorial in Morristown does show a musket. And we do know that even though he was a Quaker, he did actually have Quaker partners in, Jack, wasn't there a name for this Quaker troop that picked up muskets and against their religion? I can't remember the name of the.
Yeah, that was the Associators. That was Franklin's. It went back into the 1740s, and Benjamin Franklin had started these Associators to encourage what tended to be pacifist Quakers to get involved with the militia, and had that totally voluntary type of militia that they called the Associators, and that was the militia for Pennsylvania.
And I imagine when he is delivering his work that on horseback, he was armed with a musket just in case. And when he made that trek as described by Joy, maybe he used it to, get food, rabbits and such. So we can just imagine. We don't know for sure.
Yep, exactly. So I have a couple of questions from the chat I just want to read. And one of them is from Stephen Ball. They ask, Steve Payne wrote, "These are the times that try men's souls," and he wanted to get some clarity on that word, souls. Do you think Thomas Paine meant it literally, as like a theist or deist, or metaphorically, perhaps as a stand-in for psyche or resolve? Stephen was just curious about his frame of mind in using that specific word, and also wanted to say hi to Margaret.
Well, I think it was common language in that time. And so perhaps he didn't really give a lot of thought behind that, but used language that people related to. He was known for doing that. I know that as a deist, he believed in the natural world, and where the souls went was unknown. And like you said, we can only learn the language of God through science and investigation. So That's my take on the word souls. Anyone else have an opinion?
Oh, Ian, I think your hand's raised.
Well, Paine wrote Rights of Man to inspire mankind to a more exalted idea of God. I mean, he was a deist, and it was an attack on the Bible, but also an attack on atheism, on the slaughter of priests, and on the whole idea of a state religion. Paine, he saw God everywhere in nature, and he wanted to inspire people to consider God in the same way. Although, in Common Sense, he wrote, above all things, free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. Well, Paine was a propagandist in the 18th century meaning of the word, the spreading of ideas and principles. And he used God and nature and humor, three tools to make his ideas clear to his readers. For example, one of the strongest natural proofs of the folly of hereditary right in kings is that nature disproves it. Otherwise, she would not so frequently turn it into ridicule by giving mankind an ass for a lion. Now, in the Age of Reason, part first, he wrote, I believe in one God and no more, and I hope for happiness beyond this life. In his will, he wrote, I die in perfect composure and resignation to the will of my Creator, God. So I think those are two examples of his idea of soul. One other thing I want to say, that in England, in Lewis, he was an excise inspector, and their job was to stop the smuggling of goods. So an excise inspector was paid £50 a year, had to supply his own horse and sword, and the job often meant hunting and challenging and even fighting smugglers. So Paine knew how to use a sword, and actually on a trip to France, his ship was attacked by a pirate ship, and he fought pirates on the deck with his sword. So he knew how to fight. It's just he was seen as being much more valuable to write.
That phrase, I believe in one God, it can be found in the Age of Reason. And it's typical of what a deist would write.
So another question that we got from the chat is from Bill Kane. Wanted to ask, did many other Americans share his criticisms of Christianity as expressed in the Age of Reason, or was it rather rare to be so skeptical?
Well, that was the Enlightenment, questioning everything, seeking information beyond what you're told. And, the Enlightenment is what most of the founding fathers were in the process of expressing. You find nature's God in a lot of documents, including our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So the Age of Reason, I would highly recommend to anyone who wants to learn more about critical thinking and rational thought. And then you can follow it up with Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian.
Just to follow up a little bit, the word many, I think we got to kind of question that, right? There weren't many people who were as open with their religious skepticism as Paine. Very few, actually. And that's why he received such vitriol for having first written Common Sense and then daring to write something like The Age of Reason. We didn't, there weren't really any statistics of religiosity during this time period. We know on the eve of the revolution, roughly half of the population were formal church members. That would creep up significantly during the Second Great Awakening of the early 19th century. But there were very few people who were openly criticizing Christianity like Paine did in the Age of Reason. Deism was fairly widespread, like Margaret said, among the educated classes, among the founding fathers, but to our knowledge wasn't quite as widespread among the populace. That would start to happen a bit more again in the 19th century, kind of hand in hand with the Second Great Awakening. There are a lot of people who are reacting against the Second Great Awakening and the efforts of evangelicals to push the temperance movement, for example. So that's when you actually get a lot more like working class individuals who start to identify as deists and freethinkers during the 1820s. And that's also when we start to get celebrations of Thomas Paine's birthday among working men and labor radicals during the 1820s.
And I just wanted to see some of the hands that were raised. I know, Preston, you've been waiting. If you'd like, you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, three-part question, I guess. First of all, to the questions about the American Revolution and what people were doing during that time and who was on what side, someone in the comments suggested Ken Burns' series on the American Revolution, and it is fascinating. So if you have any questions, that would be a good place to start. And it frames the revolution as really a civil war between royalists and revolutionaries. And caught up in that civil war were slaves who were on both sides and Native Americans who were on both sides. So it was a mess. So that would give you a sense for who was doing what during the revolution. I've often wondered about the impact of the Native Americans. You had the Native American culture, which you could say was kind of had a deistic religion. And the colonists coming over were exposed to that. And it's particularly in Philadelphia, where the Lenape had a very strong leader, Tamanend, and the Tammany societies were being formed at that time as sort of political organizations. He was very well liked among the colonists. And I have not seen anything, but I guess my question is it possible that Paine and some other deists were influenced by by the culture of the Native Americans who were already here, already practicing their naturalistic religion? And the third point is that I have to remember every time I read about Paine and his religious philosophy that he came before Darwin by a generation. And a lot of religious people were trying to kind of figure out where we came from. And Darwin kind of explained it. And I really believe that if Thomas Paine had lived a generation later, he would have embraced Darwin's teachings.
I agree with everything you said. In fact, Benjamin Franklin was famously said to Thomas Paine when he heard about the Age of Reason being written, he said, "You might as well spit against the wind." So he was preparing Thomas Paine for backlash. Christopher, what do you think about that question regarding Native Americans? Do you think he was more of the enlightened Europeans than influenced by Native Americans?
I'm not really sure. This goes to a sort of way I talk with my students about the field of intellectual history when I'm teaching like historical methodology, and that Probably 40, 50 years ago, a lot of intellectual historians wrote as if like ideas could just be in the air, right? And people are just sort of pulling from what is around. So was Paine pulling from, native kind of metaphysics and the like? I don't know. I don't know if anyone else on the call does. I haven't read accounts specifically from him where he's sort of discussing this influence or mentioning his, contacts with native peoples, but I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility, especially given, that we know that he was not a prejudiced person and was open to learning from people of different races and backgrounds. It's certainly possible, but I can't say with certainty.
I can't say,
Oh, go ahead, whoever's speaking.
I can't say with any certainty, but it seems like to me I read somewhere that Benjamin Franklin and Paine were involved with a delegation to the Iroquois.
Yes, I was going to mention that. Thank you, Jean. Yes, and he actually wrote about his experience going there to formulate a treaty. He was so impressed that the delegation from the Native Americans included women and children as equals and a part of all decision making. So I thought that was really fascinating. He called them I think the documentation said something like peaceful people and loving people, and then mentioned all of that. But I can send what I know to whoever is interested in that particular writings that Tom Paine did about his treaty work.
And sorry, I just highlighted Francisca. I saw your hand was raised. Do you want
Yes.
to speak on that too? Yeah.
Yes. Actually, it's not so much about the Native Americans, but we know when we're discussing influence, I think one of his biggest influences were actually the Brits in the 18th century. Because don't forget that, he was in Britain he was in England from 1737 to like late 1774, and he read a lot of newspapers. He would have read some of the most popular pamphlets at the time, like, say, Major John Cartwright's Letters on American Independence, where he actually proposed not so much independence, but like federalism, like, Britain, like America would be part of Britain. And then you had popular writers like James Murray, who actually, believe it or not, wrote a series of sermons called Sermons to Asses and New Sermons to Asses. And these were actually popular not just in Britain, but in the United States as well, too. I mean, the colonies. They went through like at least several, editions. And then there was Granville Sharp, who was writing about rights and how Americans deserve their rights too. So I think that Paine is I think he's drawing a lot of this from the British writers. Of course, it's hard to say, but because these things are reprinted in the newspapers and because he was such an avid newspaper reader, I think it would not have been difficult for him to glean these things. But I think what is amazing about what Paine did with these materials is that he just brought it far beyond what these writers are talking about. Like, for instance, you had James Murray, who was very anti-aristocratic, and so was, like, say, James Burke, who was writing in political disquisitions that aristocrats were enjoying far too much influence. So I think that, and none of these people would actually say that, oh, we should get rid of the aristocracy, we should get rid of the hereditary, government, that sort of thing. But like, I think Paine really pushed this. So I mean, you could say that he really took a lot of these political writers in Britain and radicalized them. That's how I see it, at least. Because a lot of these writers were coming from about like 1768 up through 1772. So I think he probably would have been aware of them.
Thanks so much, Francis. And this will be the last question for the question and answer round. We're seeing all your questions in the chat, so all the unanswered questions will be writing back to you with some answers. But Barbara, I saw your hand was raised. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm just going to ask if you see a little prompt that's asking you to unmute, and then feel free to ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. What is happening with the statue that is supposed to be in Washington, D.C.? I think you showed a picture of it. So it looked like it was finished already. And is that getting ready to be put in Washington, D.C., and where would it be?
Well, I'll speak to that. I'm the president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. It is a long process to get prized property in Washington, D.C. You have to go through a rigorous state of approvals, and then your design goes through a lot of approval steps as well. And each time we go through a step, we feel more invigorated and excited. Uh, this we don't think we're going to just have a statue in Washington, D.C. We want to make this a place where people can sit on a bench and they'll feel like it's something that Thomas Paine is welcoming them to learn more. So all of this takes money. All of this takes time. We have 7 years from the date of December 27th, 2022, when Biden signed into law the instruction to place a memorial to Thomas Paine. We are so happy that we have been granted Area 1, which is the most prestigious of the Washington area sites. So we're working now with Congressman Jamie Raskin and other Republicans to make it a bipartisan bill, but it does have to go through Congress, the Senate, and signed by the president for Area 1. So please stay for the social hour where you're going to meet Xenos Frudakis and get to see the statue up close. And I hope a lot of you will stay on and have a toast to Thomas Paine. But I'll talk about that later.
So this concludes the question and answer portion of the program. Sponsors of this event will now express their thanks to you for attending with a self-introduction and a brief overview of the organizations that they represent. This program was made possible with their financial assistance, but to build the memorial to Thomas Paine in Washington, D.C., we also need your assistance. Please donate what you can tonight. The donation link is in the chat.
Don't say words. Happy 250th birthday of Common Sense. I'm Joy Massoff. I'm a member of the board of the Thomas Paine Historical Association, and I am also a member of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. So I guess you could say I'm never bored, especially when I have my little friend Orion with me. TPAH's mission is simple. We are dedicated to ensuring Paine's rightful place in history as a preeminent founder of the United States of America and the key political theorist in the age of democratic revolutions around the world. We were founded to correct the record on Paine and rescue it from the negative propaganda and slander perpetuated against Paine by most historians in the 19th century. Our organization was founded on January 29, 1884 in New York City by leading progressives. These were champions of the free thought movement in the midst of the Gilded Age, to foster social justice, which is a key tenet of Paine's beliefs. Now, 142 years later, our mission is even more critical. Today, we are among the oldest historical associations in the United States and the most respected source for accurate information about Thomas Paine. This July, Princeton University Press will unveil Thomas Paine Collected Writings, with TPHA's president Gary Burton as one of an elite international editorial team. This 20-year-long project includes 166 newly identified letters and doubles Paine's known works, making it the most exhaustive, complete compendium available. We recently merged with the UK-based Thomas Paine Society, giving us a global presence. Paine would have loved that. He saw himself as a citizen of the world, with a globalist vision of universal harmony. There is no doubt that he was one of the most influential political, philosophical, and social figures of his time. We offer numerous lectures by leading historians, all available on Zoom, 2 bi-monthly journals, and many other special events. In addition, we maintain the most complete repository of Paine information at our website, thomaspaine.org. Sign up, or better still, become a member. Now, in the times that are trying all our souls, we need Paine's wisdom more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a part of today's celebration of the birth of the great free-thinking hero of democracy, Thomas Paine. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. FFRF is a free thought association with more than 41,000 members, founded in 1978, which exists to defend the constitutional principle of separation between state and church. Please find out more about our many actions to help ensure that reason and our secular constitution prevail by visiting our website at ffrf.org. I also serve as secretary of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is a proud founding organizational member of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, whose purpose is to erect a memorial to our forgotten founder, Thomas Paine, in Washington, D.C., to inspire and educate Americans. It's shocking that our nation's capital lacks a tribute to the man who named our very country, and without whose writings and reasonings the United States of America as a democracy would in all probability not even exist. We're excited that Congress has entrusted our association with placing a memorial to Paine in D.C. Our project is a patriotic one, to unify our greatly divided nation and remind it of its historic roots, of the great excitement of crafting an entirely new and secular democracy. 250 years ago this January, Paine famously wrote in Common Sense, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again." To paraphrase Paine, you and everyone listening have it in our power to make a Paine Memorial a reality. We need your help. Visit the Thomas Paine Memorial Association website at thomaspainememorial.org, and please, if you enjoyed this program, donate today. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Delancey, and I am delighted to serve as an honorary member of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. Thank you all for joining us today. Each year, the association helps celebrate Thomas Paine's birthday, giving us a chance to reflect on who he was and the powerful impact of his ideas. This year's theme focuses on his courageous role during the Revolutionary War and highlights some lesser-known but truly important parts of his life in the fight for liberty. We hope today's program inspires you to support our efforts to create a Thomas Paine Memorial in Washington, D.C. This standing memorial will honor Paine as a founder, patriot, and champion of reason and human rights, and it will serve as an educational and cultural resource for generations to come. The memorial will be inscribed with some of Paine's most powerful words, inviting reflection on many of the important ideas that help shape our nation. For the comfort of those who come to the memorial, there will be benches on which to sit for quiet thought and reflection. And there'll be a liberty tree as a living symbol of our right to gather and to be heard. At the center of the memorial will be a statue of Thomas Paine, honoring the man who so powerfully reminded us that in America, the law is king. Thank you again for being here to celebrate Thomas Paine's lasting legacy and to support this important effort. Please visit the Thomas Paine Memorial Association website for more information. The link, along with an option to donate, will appear in the chat. We appreciate your generosity.
Hello, and thank you all for participating in this celebration of Thomas Paine on his birthday. I'm Elaine Lowell, president of the Thomas Paine Society in Pasadena, California. We are a nonprofit established in 1993 with the mission to educate the public about the life and works of Thomas Paine. We can be found online at thomaspainesociety.org. So here we are. It's been nearly 250 years since the Declaration of Independence promised all Americans their inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Though rarely quoted, The Declaration also guaranteed that should government become destructive to those ends, that we the people had the right to abolish it. It's no secret that politicians today are not concerned about their sworn oath to defend our rights, but instead in amassing the biggest government and the biggest military in the history of the world, all with a blatant disregard for the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Thomas Paine wrote that a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it the superficial appearance of being right, and at first raises a formidable outcry in defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides, he said. Time makes more converts than reason. Tyranny today is met with a shrug. An illegal war here or there, political bribery as the norm, free speech with approval, these infringements and more have been normalized and given the appearance of being right. Tyranny is now an American custom. It's just the way things are. What do you think Paine would think of America today? What do you think he would advise? Let me know your thoughts in an email to tpsociety@sbcglobal.net. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mandisa Thomas, founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, and I would like to thank you all for attending the 2026 Thomas Paine birthday celebration. Black Nonbelievers is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area, we connect with other Blacks and allies who are living free of religion and might otherwise be shunned by family and friends by providing a caring, friendly, and informative community. Instead of accepting dogma, we determine truth and morality through reason and evidence. The mission of Black Nonbelievers is to provide secular fellowship, nurture and support nonbelievers in coming out, also known as open identification, encourage pride in non-religious identities, educate the public on the history and current state of non-belief in Black communities, and organize events and charitable causes, as well as empower Black non-religious people in racial and social justice. Black Nonbelievers welcomes all regardless of age, gender identity, sexual identity, national origin, or racial identity. As we celebrate our 15 years in existence, let us also celebrate Thomas Paine's legacy of church-state separation as well as racial justice. Thank you all, and please visit blacknonbelievers.org to learn more about our organization. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robin Blumner, President and CEO of the Center for Inquiry. CFI was founded 50 years ago by people like Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov, James the Amazing Randi, and Paul Kurtz to stand up for the Enlightenment values of reason, science, and secularism. And who better to embody those values than Thomas Paine? Paine's No King's message rings so very true now and today. He famously said, "The law is king in a society that values freedom, like the one America aspired to be." But he had another message in his pamphlet, Common Sense, that feels so very current. And it was one of mending fences across partisan divides. Here, Paine calls his fellow colonists to a common purpose. Quote, "Wherefore, instead of gazing at each other with suspicious or doubtful curiosity, let each of us hold out to his neighbor the hearty hand of friendship, and unite in drawing a line which, like an act of oblivion, shall bury in forgetfulness every former dissension. Let the names of Whig and Tory be extinct, and let none other be heard among us than those of a good citizen, an open and resolute friend, and a virtuous supporter of the rights of mankind and of the free and independent states of America. Paine's efforts to have us see past our partisan loyalties and to see instead the best in our political opponents for the good of us all is a lesson for today. And I appreciate that Thomas Paine reminded me of it. So thank you to everyone here who is inspired by Thomas Paine and seeks to keep his memory and his message alive. I promise that the Center for Inquiry will continue to do our part to bring Thomas Paine's Enlightenment values to life.
What does it mean to be truly free in thought and spirit? Tonight we gathered to celebrate a man who dared to ask and answer that question. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephen Emmert, Executive Director of the Secular Coalition for America, and it is my honor to welcome you tonight, and thank you all for being here at this remarkable Thomas Paine event. As an organization that advocates for reason, science, and the separation of religion and government, we couldn't be more thrilled to sponsor this celebration of a man who championed these very ideals. Thomas Paine was a visionary who understood the power of free thought and the importance of questioning authority to achieve progress. Tonight, as we honor the legacy of Thomas Paine, let us also celebrate the incredible work you all do in advancing the secular values that make our democracy strong. Your support, your engagement, and your commitment are what enable us to continue this vital mission. On behalf of the entire team, thank you for standing with us. Together, we can build a future where every voice is heard, every mind is free, and every individual is powered to thrive without fear or favoritism. Enjoy the rest of the special evening, and let's continue to honor Thomas Paine, not just in word, but in action. Thank you.
250 years ago, in the late summer of 1775, King George III issued a document called the Proclamation of Rebellion. In it, the king condemned his rebellious subjects for forfeiting the allegiance they owe to the power that has protected and supported them, and commanded his loyalists to root out and punish the subversive elements that dared to question his divinely granted authority. And he signed it with 4 words that defined the old world: God save the king. That signature was more than a closing, it was a theory of power. It was the assertion that morality, truth, and the right to rule were handed down from a mountaintop through a divine bloodline to a single man who was answerable only to the heavens. In that world, you weren't a citizen, you were a subject. You didn't have rights, you had permissions. But then, in January of 1776, a young, argumentative firebrand named Thomas Paine, a humanist who famously declared, "To do good is my religion," published a feisty little pamphlet called Common Sense. He didn't just argue for a change in government, he argued for a change in the human self-concept. He looked at the king's idea of divine right and called it an affront to nature, and he argued that the cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. He replaced God Save the King with a more daring, more humanist proposition that the law is king and the law belongs to the people. Paine wrote, "These are the times that try men's souls," and he was talking about the psychological wound of knowing you are living with something less than liberty. We are living in such a moment again. In the last few weeks, we have seen an administration that treats the Constitution like a suggestion and the human rights of our neighbors like a nuisance. We have seen thuggish violence from Venezuela to Minneapolis, where I'm recording this video today. We see an administration that doesn't just find the law inconvenient, they mock and scorn it because they believe they have a divine right to rule. When we see ICE agents tearing apart families in the middle of the night, or billionaires using their platforms to amplify the most dehumanizing rhetoric against our transgender neighbors, we are seeing the modern proclamation of rebellion. They are telling us we owe allegiance to their power. They are trying to make us feel small, divided, and helpless. And what Paine reminds us is what he said: we have it in our power to begin the world over again. That's the promise of humanism, the idea that we can build a better world not by waiting on some authority, seen or unseen, but by using the best of ourselves, the best of humanity, to build a world where everyone is free and can flourish. 250 years ago, Paine's words called American patriots to challenge an autocrat, and today they have the same resonance. His wisdom is as true as it was in 1776, and his call should inspire us all. The American Humanist Association will keep fighting to preserve Paine's legacy, not just by remembering him, but by fighting for what he stood for: the freedom of conscience, equality under the law, consent of the governed. Thanks for being here. Thanks for honoring Thomas Paine's legacy. And let's continue to be the kind of patriots that he called us to be.
Hi everyone, Nick Fish, President of American Atheists here. Today we mark Thomas Paine's birthday, and this month, the 250th anniversary of the publication of Common Sense. We do so not to elevate Paine to saint-like status, but to remember that ideas can still make a difference. We aren't here to mythologize the distant past, but to recognize that Paine, a mortal person, handed each of us, also mortal people, an extraordinary torch, hoping we would keep it alight now so that we too can pass it on. When Common Sense was first published, independence was far from inevitable. It was controversial, radical, dangerous. Paine's words shattered long-held assumptions, challenging people to examine traditional ways of thinking, warning his contemporaries and us to question and resist tyranny, never accepting it as normal, saying, "A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right." He indicted systems, political or religious, that demanded unquestioning obedience instead of reasoned justification. Paine rejected the inherited rule of monarchs, the divine ordination of power, and the idea that authority comes from a church or a crown. Instead, he insisted that legitimate power comes from the people. In America, he wrote, the law is king. Paine was skeptical of the fusion of religion and government. He'd seen faith weaponized as a tool of oppression. So despite what today's religious nationalists claim, that is the true foundation of our country and our secular democracy. No divine rulers, no hierarchy above the law, no exemptions, religious or otherwise, from equality. In his work, The American Crisis, Paine was writing for people who were diverse, divided, tired, scared, and uncertain about whether freedom was worth the cost. But Paine understood tyranny thrives when people let it, either out of fear or exhaustion or complacency. He criticized fair-weather patriots and rallied readers not only to participate, but to persist. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom, he wrote, must undergo the fatigues of supporting it. He never promised that the fight would be easy, only that it would be worthwhile. So 250 years later, that's a lesson we must remember today, tomorrow, and in all the trying times ahead. Because once again, we are living in a moment that demands action. But today, it's not a foreign king, but a domestic despot and a regime that rewards obedience and punishes dissent. American atheists have been called radical for advancing the very same ideals that Thomas Paine championed: civil rights, political equality, social inclusion, and the empowerment of people through education, advocacy, and community building. Since 1963, American Atheists has been answering Paine's call to speak out, organize, resist, and build broad coalitions. We refuse to live in fear, and we should reject the idea that anyone must surrender their freedom of their mind or their autonomy of their body to someone else's religious beliefs. If defending those freedoms and the absolute separation of church and state makes us radical, then we wear that label as a badge of honor, though we happen to think it's just common sense. If you do too, I hope you'll visit atheist.org right now to become a member of American Atheists and support our work defending secular democracy, advancing religious equality, promoting reason over religious dogma, and protecting freedom for all. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Kondo, a board member of the Free Thought Society, and it is a great pleasure to be a co-sponsor of the 2026 birthday celebration of Thomas Paine. We at the Free Thought Society support a variety of service projects and events annually, which you can learn more about at our website, ftsociety.org. On a personal level, I've really enjoyed portraying Thomas Paine at various events to raise awareness of his legacy. In 2025, I was honored to portray Paine during the parade at DragonCon in Atlanta, Georgia, and for last summer's No King's Day on June 14th, I was proud to be interviewed by a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania news station while I was dressed at a demonstration as Thomas Paine, where I was able to remind people about how he famously wrote against monarchs or kings in America. Paine's proclamation in particular, that in free countries the law ought to be king, is just as relevant today as it was 250 years ago. I find his courage and the courage of many other freethinkers during times of adversity in America's history to be a real source of strength and perspective as we continue the fight for democracy in our country. If you are interested in receiving the Free Thought Society's complimentary quarterly e-zine, please sign up at our website or our Facebook page. We showcase a variety of articles, activity reports, and free thought volunteer opportunities. The secular movement is a tremendous group of partnering organizations that have a lot of purpose, momentum, and positive energy, and it's an exciting team that you can join today. So on behalf of the Free Thought Society, many thanks to the speakers, the co-sponsors, and the organizers behind this educational and entertaining event, especially to the hosts and to the technical crew. In the tradition of Thomas Paine, please keep making a difference to uphold democracy in whatever way you can. And thanks for attending.
Thank you, co-sponsors. What great messages you delivered. After the credits slideshow, we will open the social hour with a very special guest, the sculptor, Zenos Frudakis. He is joining us from his beautiful studio in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Zenos is the sculptor we have selected to work with as we move forward with the Thomas Paine Washington, D.C. Memorial Plan. A link to his studio will be placed in the chat so you can see all the marvelous pieces he has created.
We thank all the co-sponsors for this event and remind audience members that all the supporting organizations provide a philosophical home for you and do their part in educating the public. If you cannot stay for the social hour, we thank you very much for spending your time with us. I want to say thank you as well to my co-host, Margaret Downey, president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. She wrote the program script and arranged for all the speakers and video presentations. Thank you, Margaret. The social hour will be recorded and will be available in a YouTube posting, so anyone leaving now can view later what goes on as sculptor Zenos Frudakis is featured as a very special social hour guest.